AITA for confronting my brother about his constant negativity, which led to a huge family fallout. For some context, I, 29F, have an older brother, Jake, 35M. Growing up, Jake was always a bit of a troublemaker, but he had a charm about him that made people overlook his antics. He was funny, outgoing, and always had a way of making people laugh, even if it meant bending the truth or saying something inappropriate. As kids, we got along well, despite the typical sibling rivalry. However, as we grew older, I started to notice a change in Jake. His humor became more mean-spirited, and his outlook on life turned darker. At first, it wasn't a big deal. Everyone has their bad days, right? But over the years, Jake became more and more negative. He would complain about everything, make sarcastic comments about people's successes, and rarely seemed happy for anyone else. It was exhausting. At first, I thought it was just a phase. But after several years of hearing him constantly gripe about his job, his friends, our parents, and basically anything good that happened to anyone else, I began to wonder if something deeper was going on. I tried to talk to him about it a couple of times, but he would just brush it off. He'd say, "It's just who I am," or "I'm just being real." Eventually, I stopped pushing, but the negativity reached a breaking point last year. My family had gathered for Thanksgiving at my parents' house, and we were all sitting around the table having a pretty pleasant meal. It was one of those rare moments when everyone was actually getting along. My mom had just finished telling us about her latest trip to Paris. She had saved for months to go, and everyone was congratulating her on how well she'd handled everything. Then Jake chimed in. "Yeah, that's great, Mom. You got to go to Paris, but don't forget, your bank account is probably looking pretty empty now," he said with a smirk. The table went silent. It wasn't just the comment, it was the delivery. It was like he was always looking for a way to tear people down. My mom didn't even know how to respond. Dad, who had been quiet the whole meal, finally said, "Jake, cut it out. This is supposed to be a nice family dinner." Jake just shrugged and took a bite of his turkey. It felt like the entire atmosphere of the dinner shifted. I could see the disappointment on my parents' faces, and I couldn't just sit there anymore. After the dinner, I pulled Jake aside and told him he needed to stop with the negativity. I said that it wasn't funny anymore and that he was always bringing everyone down. I told him it wasn't about being real or honest. It was just cruel. I asked him why he felt the need to be so bitter all the time. I wasn't screaming at him, but I made it clear that his attitude was really damaging the family dynamic. Jake got defensive. He started talking about how fake everyone was being and how everyone in our family was living in some kind of fantasy world. He said he was just telling the truth and that no one could handle the truth. It turned into an argument, with him saying that I was just as bad as everyone else for not getting it. It got pretty heated, and eventually he just stormed off, saying he didn't want to talk to me anymore. The fallout from that conversation was bigger than I expected. Our parents were disappointed in both of us. They said we should have handled it differently and that I shouldn't have confronted him in such a blunt way. They argued that Jake was going through his own stuff and didn't need me piling on. They told me to let it go and that Jake would eventually come around. But I didn't want to just let it go. His negativity had been affecting me for years, and I wasn't willing to just sit back and let him drag everyone down without saying anything. I tried to explain to them that it wasn't just a phase or him going through something. It was a pattern. It was constant and never-ending. My parents didn't seem to understand, though. They said I had made a mountain out of a molehill and that I should have been more patient with him. Now, the rest of the family is divided. My brother hasn't spoken to me since Thanksgiving, and there's this awkward tension whenever we all get together. I've tried reaching out to him a couple of times, but he just ignores me or responds with passive-aggressive comments. Our parents are caught in the middle, and they've started asking me to apologize to Jake for making him feel attacked. I don't think I should apologize for standing up for myself and others in the family, but my parents are pushing hard, and it's been really uncomfortable. I've even had a few relatives pull me aside and tell me that I was too harsh on Jake, that he's just a product of his environment, or that he's been going through a lot of stress at work. They all say I should have just let it go or waited for him to come around on his own. I understand they're trying to mediate, but I don't think it's fair to excuse his behavior anymore. I'm at the point where I don't want to keep enabling him, but I also don't want to be the reason my family is falling apart. It's really hard to know if I'm in the wrong here. So, AITA for confronting my brother about his constant negativity, which led to a huge family fallout. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit like and subscribe to the channel. Your support means a lot and motivates me to create even more amazing content just for you. Make sure to turn on notifications so you'll never miss out on a new video. I'm curious, when do you usually watch my videos? While working, studying, or just relaxing? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much for your support. It truly helps the channel grow. AITA for refusing to help my sister after she repeatedly asked for my support, but turned on me when I said no. I, 28M, have a sister, Emma, 25F, and we've always had a complicated relationship. We were never super close growing up, and while I've always tried to be there for her when she needed it, I've noticed that she tends to take advantage of my kindness, which has caused some tension over the years. A few months ago, Emma started calling me a lot more often, asking for help with everything. I don't mind helping family, but these requests became a pattern that felt one-sided and draining. I was there for her when she needed help moving apartments, when her car broke down, when she had a big work project she couldn't handle, and so on. She's always had a habit of turning to me whenever something goes wrong in her life, and I've tried my best to support her, even though it's been overwhelming at times. Things reached a tipping point when she came to me asking for help with her finances. Emma had recently gotten a new job and was living paycheck to paycheck because of student loans and credit card debt. She told me that she had made some bad financial decisions and was struggling to make ends meet. She said that she didn't want to have to ask our parents for help because they had already helped her with her rent once, and she felt guilty about it. So, she turned to me. Now, I'm no financial expert, but I do okay for myself. I've worked hard to keep my finances in check, so I understand budgeting and saving. Emma asked me if I could help her pay off some of her debts, which amounted to a few $1,000s. She said she couldn't afford the minimum payments and was in danger of falling behind on her rent. She insisted that she would pay me back as soon as she got her next paycheck, but at that point, I had already lent her money in the past, and she hadn't been able to pay me back in full. I told her I was not comfortable lending her that much money again, especially considering how many times I've helped her before and never gotten a repayment. I offered to help her by giving her some advice on budgeting and how to approach her debt, but I was firm that I wouldn't give her the money. She didn't take it well, and she started getting upset, accusing me of not caring about her or supporting her the way families should. She told me that I was selfish and that if I really cared about her, I would help her out. I tried to explain that I couldn't afford to keep bailing her out of her problems, especially if she wasn't going to change her habits. I told her that she needed to take responsibility for her finances and learn to manage her money better, instead of relying on others. I even offered to help her find resources like financial counseling, but she brushed it off and said it wasn't the same as giving her actual money. The argument escalated from there, and she accused me of being heartless and judging her, when all she was trying to do was survive. She said that I was making her feel like a failure, and that I was abandoning her when she needed me the most. I told her that I wasn't abandoning her, but that I had to set boundaries because I couldn't continue to sacrifice my own well-being just to keep helping her when she wasn't making any effort to improve her situation. Since then, Emma has barely spoken to me. She hasn't reached out for help, and when I try to contact her, she's cold and distant. She's even been telling our parents that I refuse to help her and that I'm being unfair. Our parents have expressed their disappointment in me, saying that families should always be there for each other, no matter what. They're upset that I've created a rift in the family over money and that I didn't support Emma when she needed it the most. Now, I'm left feeling conflicted. I know I did the right thing by setting a boundary and not enabling her behavior, but I also feel guilty for not helping her when she was struggling. I'm starting to wonder if I should have just given her the money or found a way to make things work. I've been told by several friends that I'm in the right, but I can't shake the feeling that I might have done something wrong. I'm just exhausted from the constant pressure to help her and the guilt that comes with not doing enough. I know my sister has a lot of potential, and I want to see her succeed, but I also need to take care of myself and my own life. So, AITA for refusing to help her financially and setting boundaries after everything she's put me through, P.S. I'm not a financial expert or loaded with money. I just know how to budget well enough to keep myself out of debt. I've been paying off student loans for years and have a steady job, so I'm not in the same position as her. I just don't think it's healthy for me to keep being the one she turns to every time she messes up. AITA for confronting my sister-in-law after she kept asking me to babysit her kids despite my clear boundaries. So a bit of background. I, 29F, have been married to my husband, 30M, for about 5 years. We don't have kids of our own yet, but we plan to in the future. My husband's family is pretty close-knit, but there's one person in particular who has been causing a bit of tension between us recently. My sister-in-law, Rachel, 33F. Rachel has 2 kids, Ethan, 6, and Lily, 4, and she and her husband, Mark, 35M, have been dealing with some challenges. They're both working full-time, and they don't have much help when it comes to childcare. I have nothing against Rachel or her kids. In fact, I adore Ethan and Lily, and I'm always happy to spend time with them when we get together as a family. However, there's a recurring issue where Rachel seems to expect me to drop everything and babysit for her, even though I've made it clear that I'm not comfortable with that responsibility unless I'm specifically available. I'll try to explain the situation in more detail so that it's clear where I'm coming from. Rachel's first request for help came about a year ago when she and Mark both had important work events on the same weekend. Rachel asked if I could watch Ethan and Lily for a few hours on Saturday, and I agreed because it seemed like a reasonable favor for family. I didn't mind at all, plus I enjoy spending time with the kids. But then a couple of weeks later, she asked if I could babysit again, and again, and again. At first, I was fine with helping out here and there, but the frequency of her requests started to feel excessive. I told her that I wasn't able to babysit as often as she was asking. My husband and I have a busy schedule ourselves: work, hobbies, socializing with friends, and we have our own responsibilities. But despite being clear that I wasn't able to help regularly, Rachel started to take it for granted. She'd call or text me on short notice, sometimes just a day or two before she needed help. And even though I would kindly say no or suggest other alternatives, she would still try to push me into saying yes. It got to the point where she wasn't just asking for an hour or two here and there. She wanted me to watch the kids for an entire day while she and Mark went to a concert, or even for an overnight stay while they went on a weekend trip. Every time I said no, she'd respond with something along the lines of, "But you're so good with the kids. They love you," or, "I know you have time. You're not doing anything on a weekend, right?" And sometimes even it's not like it's a big deal. We're family. It wasn't that I didn't want to help at all. It's that I don't feel comfortable with the expectation that I should be constantly available to babysit, especially when it feels like I'm being used as a free daycare provider. The worst part was when I'd explain that I needed to take some time for myself, or that I was busy with other commitments, and she'd accuse me of being selfish or not caring enough about family. Her tone would shift, and it always made me feel guilty for setting boundaries. The breaking point came last month. Rachel had asked me to watch the kids for an entire weekend because she and Mark wanted to go on a spontaneous getaway. I had already made plans to visit my parents, which had been arranged weeks in advance. I politely told her I wasn't available, and I thought that would be the end of it. But Rachel didn't give up. She called me 3 more times over the next 2 days, each time trying to convince me to cancel my plans. When I refused again, she started bringing up things like how much she needed a break and how I was the only person she could count on. After the 3rd call, I finally had enough. I texted her, saying that I was happy to help out when I'm able to, but I wasn't a full-time babysitter, and she needed to respect my boundaries. I also mentioned that she had been asking for too much, and it was becoming overwhelming. I told her that I understood her situation, but I needed her to stop expecting me to always be available. I also suggested she look into other options, like hiring a sitter or asking other family members for help. She didn't respond immediately, but I could tell she was upset. The next time I saw her at a family dinner, things were tense. Rachel barely acknowledged me, and when she did, she kept making passive-aggressive comments. At one point, she said to my husband, "I don't know why my name is so selfish." I asked for a simple favor, and she acted like I was asking her to move mountains. I could tell she was trying to make me look bad in front of the whole family. It was uncomfortable. I was upset. I tried to stay calm, but I ended up saying, "Rachel, I've told you I'm happy to help, but I'm not your free babysitter. You can't just expect me to drop everything for you every time you need something." That's when things exploded. Rachel started accusing me of not caring about her kids, of being unsupportive, and of not understanding how hard it is to be a parent. She raised her voice, and it turned into a full-blown argument. My husband tried to intervene, but it was already too late. The dinner ended on a sour note, and Rachel hasn't really spoken to me since. The rest of the family is divided on the issue. Some of them think I was in the right for setting boundaries, but others are upset with me for causing drama and alienating Rachel. Now, I'm wondering if I was too harsh. I understand that Rachel's situation is tough, but I feel like she's taking advantage of my kindness. I'm torn because I don't want to be seen as the bad guy, but at the same time, I'm not willing to sacrifice my own well-being just to keep the peace. So, AITA for confronting my sister-in-law about her constant babysitting requests. Let me know what you think. AITA for telling my parents I'm not coming to their house anymore because they keep inviting my ex. I, 28F, have always had a complicated relationship with my parents. 57M, 55F. They're lovely people, but they can be very stubborn, old-fashioned, and always seem to believe they know what's best for me. I moved out when I was 22, but since then, I've kept in touch with them regularly, and we've tried to maintain a somewhat normal family relationship despite our differences. A few years ago, I was in a long-term relationship with my ex, 29M. We were together for about 5 years before we broke up. The breakup wasn't exactly clean. We both made mistakes, but we also had fundamental issues that just didn't work out. I loved him, but I realized it wasn't the kind of love I needed, and I made the tough decision to end things. It was a hard process, and even though I've healed and moved on, there are still some emotional scars from that time. I thought that after the breakup, my parents would understand my need for space from my ex and respect my wishes. But apparently, that wasn't the case. I found out that my parents had kept in touch with him after we split, which I wasn't thrilled about, but didn't address it at first. However, things started getting more uncomfortable when they invited him to family events. First, it was a casual holiday dinner. I wasn't told in advance, and when I arrived, I was shocked to see him sitting there, chatting away with my parents like nothing had happened. I didn't want to make a scene, so I sucked it up and tried to make the best of it. The next time it happened was at a family barbecue. This time, my mom casually mentioned to me that my ex would be there, and I felt like I had no choice but to go. I was upset, but I tried to put on a brave face for the sake of the family. It was awkward, and I barely said 2 words to him. My parents noticed and kept trying to encourage me to talk to him, which made me even more uncomfortable. I tried to explain to them how I felt about it, but they just brushed it off, saying that it's important to keep things civil and that family is family. This situation started to get worse when they invited him to my birthday last year. I made it clear to them that I didn't want him there, but my mom insisted. She told me that it's not fair to keep him out of family events because he's been a part of our lives for so long. I couldn't understand why they couldn't just respect my wishes and let me have a birthday without the person who hurt me being there. I ended up going to the party, but the entire time, I just felt like a stranger in my own home. My ex kept trying to talk to me, and my parents kept encouraging me to reconnect. It was humiliating. After the birthday incident, I decided to set a hard boundary. I told my parents that I no longer wanted to come to their house if my ex was going to be there. I was tired of feeling forced into uncomfortable situations, and I couldn't understand why they couldn't respect my feelings. They didn't take it well. My dad called me dramatic and accused me of holding on to the past, while my mom said I was being childish. They both said I was overreacting and that I should be mature enough to deal with the situation. It's been a few months since that conversation, and my parents have been inviting me over to their house for various events, but I've been declining. Each time they reach out, they always bring up the fact that my ex is invited, and I refuse to come. My dad has been particularly angry with me, accusing me of cutting them out of my life and saying that I'm being unreasonable. Last week, I got a text from my mom, essentially telling me that I'm ruining the family dynamic by refusing to attend family events. She also said that my ex still cares about me and that I'm being too proud to let go of the past. To be honest, I don't even know if I want to keep trying to repair my relationship with my parents at this point. I understand I want to remain friendly with my ex, but I don't understand why they can't respect my boundaries. It feels like they're prioritizing his feelings over mine, and I'm sick of feeling like I'm the one who has to accommodate everyone else. I've tried to explain myself multiple times, but it feels like they just don't get it. So, AITA for telling my parents I won't come to their house anymore if they continue inviting my ex? I feel like I'm being reasonable, but I'm starting to wonder if I'm just being too sensitive or selfish about the situation. AITA for refusing to let my sister move in with me after she broke my trust multiple times. I, 28F, have a younger sister, Emily, 24F. Growing up, we were pretty close, and we always had each other's backs. Our parents were pretty hands-off, and we had to rely on each other a lot. Over the years, though, things have changed, and I feel like Emily and I have grown apart in a way that I never expected. It all started about 3 years ago when Emily made some really questionable decisions regarding money. She had just finished college, and she was struggling to find a job in her field. It's understandable. Lots of recent grads go through that. However, instead of being responsible about it, Emily started running up credit card debt, borrowing money from family, and basically living beyond her means. At first, she would come to me for help, and I'd lend her money, thinking she'd pay me back once she got back on her feet. But she never did. The first time I confronted her about the money, she promised she would pay me back, but it never happened. Months went by, and I started to feel taken advantage of. I was also frustrated because it seemed like she wasn't learning from her mistakes. She continued to make bad financial decisions, and I could see she wasn't even trying to get her act together. She would buy new clothes and go out with friends, but then complain about not having money to pay her rent. It felt like she was using me as a safety net without really appreciating it. After that, I started distancing myself a little. I still loved her and wanted to help, but I wasn't going to keep enabling her bad behavior. We didn't talk as much, but when we did, I tried to give her advice about managing her money and being more responsible. She would get defensive, saying I was being too harsh, but I genuinely wanted to help. Eventually, I told her I couldn't lend her any more money until she showed she was taking responsibility for her own finances. This didn't go over well, and it caused some tension between us. About a year later, Emily called me in tears. She had been living in an apartment with some friends, but it had fallen apart. One of her roommates had moved out unexpectedly, and the remaining roommate was difficult to live with. She had no money for rent, and her lease was ending in 2 weeks. She begged me to let her move in with me temporarily until she got on her feet. I was hesitant, but I agreed. I didn't want her to be homeless, and I thought this might be a chance for her to get back on track. That was a huge mistake. Within a few weeks of Emily moving in, I started noticing old habits resurfacing. She wasn't paying her share of the rent or utilities on time, and she would leave her stuff all over the place. I asked her to clean up after herself, but she would brush it off, saying she was too busy. I tried to be understanding at first, but it quickly became clear that she wasn't taking the situation seriously. Her financial situation wasn't improving at all, and every time I tried to talk to her about her plans to get back on her feet, she would just say, "I'm figuring it out." But she wasn't. She had no job lined up, no savings, and no real plan for the future. What really broke my trust was when I found out she had been using my credit card information without asking. She had a few friends over, and one of them needed to order some things online. Instead of asking me or offering to pay for it herself, Emily just gave them my card details. I only found out because I saw the charges on my statement. I confronted her, and she apologized, but I was furious. She had broken my trust in a way that was hard to overlook. This wasn't just about money. It was about her blatant disregard for my boundaries and my property. I told her that I couldn't let her live with me anymore. I needed space, and I couldn't keep putting myself in a position where I felt like I was constantly being disrespected and taken advantage of. She was devastated and said that I was being cruel, that she had nowhere else to go, and that I was abandoning her when she needed me the most. I felt guilty, but at the same time, I knew I had made the right decision. She had been living with me for several months, and nothing was improving. She wasn't taking responsibility for her actions, and I couldn't keep enabling her bad behavior. Since then, things have been really tense between us. My parents have been pressuring me to let her move back in with me. They say she's struggling and needs my help. They don't fully understand how much damage has been done to my trust in her, and they think I'm being too harsh. My mom told me I was being selfish and that I should just give her another chance. I get that they want to see the family together, but I don't think they understand how much emotional strain this situation has put me under. I've tried to explain to them that it's not just about money. It's about respect, boundaries, and trust. I feel like I've already given her multiple chances, and she's let me down every time. Now, Emily is asking me again if she can move in with me. She says she's learned her lesson and that things will be different this time. But I don't believe her. I don't want to go through the same cycle of lending her money, doing things for her that she can't do for herself, and getting frustrated when she doesn't appreciate it. I'm not her parent. I'm her sister, and I can't keep being the person she relies on to fix her problems. So, AITA for refusing to let my sister move in with me after she broke my trust multiple times. AITA for kicking out my friend after she made fun of my disability at a party. 30M, I have a friend, Natalie, 28F, who I've known since college. We've always been close, and I'd consider her one of my best friends, even though we've had our ups and downs over the years. However, recently, something happened at a party that's causing me to rethink our friendship entirely, and I'm not sure if I overreacted. I was born with a condition that affects my mobility. I've had to use a wheelchair since I was a child. I don't let it define me, and I try to live as independently as possible. I've always been open about my disability and talk about it when needed, but I've never wanted it to be the main focus of my life or my personality. I know it's a big part of who I am, but I don't want people to treat me differently because of it, so I try to integrate into social situations as normally as anyone else. Last weekend, I hosted a party at my apartment to celebrate my recent promotion at work. It was a small gathering of close friends, including Natalie, and everything was going well. People were laughing, enjoying the food and drinks, and having a good time. There were probably 10 of us there, all chatting in different areas of the apartment. At one point, I was sitting on the couch with a few friends, and Natalie was nearby talking to someone. I overheard her making a joke about me to one of the other guests, someone who I didn't know that well. She was saying things like, "Oh, he has a great sense of humor, but it's easy to be funny when you can't get up and walk away from an awkward conversation, and he always has a great excuse to avoid things like, 'Sorry, I can't make it to the event, my wheelchair is acting up.'" She wasn't saying it in a joking, friendly way. She was mocking me. She continued to make light of my disability, and I could tell by the tone of her voice and the look on her face that she wasn't trying to be playful. She was making fun of me. I felt embarrassed and hurt hearing these comments. I didn't want to confront her in front of everyone, so I excused myself and went to the bathroom to cool off. When I came back, I approached her in a private corner and asked if we could talk for a minute. I asked her if she realized what she had said, and she acted confused. I repeated some of the things I had overheard and asked why she would joke about something that's such a personal part of who I am. She just shrugged and said, "I was just joking around. Don't take it so seriously." I told her it wasn't a joke to me, that her words hurt, and I didn't appreciate being made fun of, especially not at my own party. She immediately started to get defensive, saying I was being overly sensitive and that I needed to lighten up. She insisted that she was just messing around like she always does with everyone, and that I shouldn't be so sensitive about it. I was already feeling hurt, but at this point, I was also getting frustrated. I told her that her jokes weren't funny, and I didn't find it acceptable to joke about my disability in front of people, especially when I wasn't there to defend myself. I told her that she needed to leave if she couldn't respect my boundaries. She laughed and said, "You can't seriously be kicking me out over a stupid joke. I didn't mean it like that." I told her that I was serious and that she could either apologize and leave the situation behind or leave my apartment. She started arguing that I was overreacting and that I was being dramatic, but I stood my ground. At this point, some of the other guests had noticed the tension, and I was embarrassed that it was escalating in front of everyone. But I wasn't going to let it slide. I eventually told her that she wasn't welcome at my party anymore, and I asked her to leave. She called me a jerk and said I was ruining our friendship over something so trivial. She stormed out of the apartment, and the party atmosphere definitely changed after that. Some people were uncomfortable, and others tried to console me, telling me that I was in the right. But I felt like I had just lost a close friend. The next day, Natalie texted me saying that I had overreacted and that she was upset that I didn't take a joke. She said I had a victim mentality and that she'd always joke like that with friends, so it shouldn't have been a big deal. I tried to explain again that it wasn't about the joke itself, but the fact that it was about something so personal to me and that I didn't think it was appropriate. She didn't respond well and instead said, I guess I can't be friends with someone who can't take a joke, and that she didn't want to be friends with someone so sensitive. I haven't spoken to her since, and I'm still processing everything. I've been getting messages from mutual friends saying that I was right to stand up for myself, but some of them have also said that I should have handled it differently, especially since we've been friends for so long. I've also heard from a few people that Natalie has been telling people I ruined our friendship over a silly joke, and that she doesn't think I should be so uptight. Now I'm wondering if I overreacted. Maybe I should have just laughed it off, or maybe I should have just brushed it off instead of making it into such a big deal. On the other hand, I feel like my disability is something I have to deal with every day, and when someone I trust mocks it, it feels like a betrayal. I don't think it's okay to make fun of anyone's struggles, especially when they don't have the power to change them. So, AITA for kicking out my friend after she made fun of my disability at my party? AITA for calling out my friend for constantly showing up uninvited to my house and expecting me to entertain her? I, 28F, have a close-knit group of friends, and we all pretty much get along, but there's one friend, Jess 29F, who has been putting a strain on my social life. I've known Jess for about 6 years, and for the most part, she's always been fun to hang out with. However, over the past few months, her behavior has been getting more and more intrusive, and I'm honestly starting to feel exhausted by it. Here's the deal. Jess lives about 30 minutes away from me, and we usually hang out once or twice a week. I don't mind having friends over, and I'm definitely the type of person who enjoys hosting. But Jess has started showing up uninvited at my house all the time, without any prior warning. It's not just a random visit once in a while. It's becoming a pattern. At first, I didn't mind it so much. Jess would text me in the morning, saying something like, "Hey, I'm in your area. Mind if I stop by?" And I'd say yes, because I genuinely enjoy spending time with her. But then she started showing up more frequently, sometimes just knocking on my door in the middle of the day without any heads up at all. When I'd ask her if she had let me know she was coming, she'd brush it off and act like it wasn't a big deal. It got worse over time. One week, she came over 3 times uninvited, each time showing up either in the afternoon or evening, and every single time, she didn't give me a heads up until she was already outside my door. The first time it happened, I didn't want to make a fuss, so I let her in and we hung out, but after a couple of these visits, it started to feel less like a casual hangout and more like an invasion. I'd be in the middle of cooking dinner, or I'd have plans with my boyfriend, Mark, 30M, and Jess would show up expecting me to drop everything and entertain her. I started feeling like I couldn't make plans for myself anymore. Jess would show up uninvited, and when I told her I was busy or had something planned, she would act all disappointed or guilt-trip me by saying things like, "Oh, I just wanted to spend time with you, but I guess it's too much to ask." It became exhausting. I felt like I had to constantly adjust my schedule for her, even though she wasn't respecting my time or boundaries. It wasn't just that she was showing up uninvited, but also the way she expected to be entertained. I'm an introvert, so I need my alone time to recharge, but Jess doesn't seem to get that. She'd show up and immediately assume that I would drop everything to hang out with her, even if I was in the middle of something or just wanted to relax. She'd talk to me about her work, complain about her family, and expect me to give her my undivided attention, even if I was tired or not in the mood to talk. Mar started to notice the strain it was putting on me as well. There was one night when we had planned a quiet evening together, and Jess showed up at my door with a bottle of wine. I told her I was planning to stay in with Mark and didn't have time to hang out, and she started getting pushy. She insisted that she didn't mind being the third wheel and that I could just tell Mark to deal with it. Mark could see I was uncomfortable, so he ended up saying, "Hey, we really need this time to ourselves," and Jess left, but it felt like an uncomfortable confrontation. After that, I realized I needed to have a more direct conversation with her about my boundaries. A couple of weeks ago, she showed up uninvited again, but this time I was fed up. I had a work deadline coming up, and I really needed to focus. When she knocked on my door, I opened it, but I was visibly irritated. I told her, "Jess, I really need some space today. I have work to do, and I wasn't expecting company." She looked taken aback for a moment, then asked if I was upset with her. I told her that I wasn't upset, but that I needed her to respect my time and stop showing up unannounced all the time. I explained that I was getting overwhelmed by her visits, and that I needed her to let me know in advance if she was planning to come over. She didn't take it well. Jess got defensive and said that she thought we were good enough friends that she should be able to just come by whenever, and that I was overreacting. She said she didn't understand why I was making a big deal out of something so small, and that I was acting like she was a burden. She also told me that if I was too busy for her, she didn't know why she should keep trying to be friends. That's when I got really upset, because it felt like she was turning the situation around and making it about me being a bad friend rather than her not respecting my boundaries. I told her that I wasn't saying I didn't want to be friends, but that I needed space and I needed her to respect that. She didn't seem to understand, so I asked her to leave, and she did, clearly upset. That was a week ago, and since then, she hasn't reached out. Our other friends have been asking me what happened between us, and I've explained that I just needed to set boundaries with Jess, but they've all been pretty neutral about it, not taking sides. I feel bad because I don't want to lose a friend over something like this, but at the same time, I can't keep putting myself in a position where I'm constantly adjusting my life to accommodate her. I try to be clear about my boundaries, but she just doesn't seem to get it, and now I'm wondering if I was too harsh in the way I handled it. So, AITA for calling out Jess and asking her to stop showing up uninvited. Let me know what you think. AITA for refusing to babysit my niece after my sister went behind my back and changed my plans. I, 30F, have a sister, Kayla, 34F, who is a single mom to my 5-year-old niece, Lily. Kayla and I have always had a complicated relationship. Growing up, we were close, but as we got older, we drifted apart. She's always been a little self-absorbed and, if I'm being honest, sometimes manipulative. But despite our differences, I've always tried to be there for her, especially now that she's raising Lily on her own. I know she's struggling, and I do my best to support her. For context, I don't have kids myself, and I'm not super enthusiastic about babysitting, but I do it when I can. I understand being a single mom is hard, so I help out whenever Kayla needs it, especially when it's last minute or if she's having a particularly tough time. I work from home, which means I have a bit of flexibility in my schedule, and I've often adjusted things to help her out. The problem started when I realized that my sister was beginning to take advantage of my generosity. A few weeks ago, Kayla asked if I could babysit Lily for a few hours one Saturday, because she had plans with some friends. I said yes, no problem. I didn't have anything special planned for the weekend, and I actually kind of looked forward to a quiet day with my niece. We agreed that I would watch Lily from noon to 5 p.m. on that Saturday, which worked for both of us. The problem started when, the day before, Kayla called me in the morning to let me know that she had changed her plans and would be gone for much longer than originally discussed. She told me that she'd be out from 12 p.m. to around 9 p.m. and that I need to keep Lily for the entire time. I wasn't thrilled by this, but I didn't want to disappoint her or Lily, so I agreed. At this point, I figured I would just rearrange my plans to accommodate the extra hours, though I was already feeling a bit resentful. The next day, I woke up to a text from Kayla that included a detailed schedule for me. It was the kind of thing I would expect from a daycare, not from my sister. It had times for meals, naps, and even playtime activities. At this point, I was really starting to get annoyed. Kayla has always been a bit controlling, but this felt excessive. I didn't want to be told exactly how to care for my niece. I'm an adult, and I know how to look after a child. But I tried to brush it off and figured I would just follow the schedule to avoid causing any drama. When the day came, I picked up Lily around noon, and things started off fine. We went to the park, played on the swings, and I tried to make the best of it. But by the time 5 p.m. came around, I was exhausted. I had spent the entire afternoon chasing after Lily and making sure she was entertained. I had also missed a few work calls that I had planned to take during that time, so I was behind on some important tasks. I texted Kayla around 5 p.m. asking when she would be home, hoping to finally get some time to myself. Instead of a simple response, I got a call from Kayla. She told me she was just getting to the restaurant and that she would be another 2 hours. She asked if I could please hang on a little longer and that she would make it up to me by taking me out to dinner sometime soon. I agreed, even though I was really starting to feel taken advantage of. I didn't want to be rude, but I was annoyed. I had already given her extra hours, and now she was asking for even more time. I didn't want to be the bad sister, but I also felt like she was pushing my boundaries. By the time 7 p.m. rolled around, I was getting visibly frustrated. I sent her a text saying I really needed to get some work done and that she needed to come home soon. She replied by saying she was still at the restaurant and would be home at 9 p.m. exactly. I felt like I was being held hostage in my own home, babysitting Lily while my sister was out enjoying herself. I ended up putting on a movie for Lily and trying to get some work done on my laptop, but I felt stressed and overwhelmed. When Kayla finally came home at 9 p.m., she acted like nothing was wrong. She thanked me for watching Lily and told me that she'd make it up to me soon. I barely said goodbye to her and left without offering to stay for a chat. I was emotionally drained, annoyed, and ready to be done. The next day, I was still upset about the whole situation. I felt like my time wasn't being respected, and my sister was treating me like her personal babysitter whenever it was convenient for her. A few days later, Kayla asked me to babysit Lily again. This time, she gave me a few days' notice, but it was still for a full day. I felt the frustration building, but I didn't want to be rude. I agreed, but then I thought about it some more and decided that I needed to set some boundaries. I texted Kayla and told her that I couldn't babysit her again for such long hours. I told her I had my own life and responsibilities and couldn't continue to rearrange everything for her. Kayla didn't take it well. She called me crying, saying that I was abandoning her and that she needed help. She told me she had no one else to rely on, and I was being selfish for refusing to help. I tried to explain that I wasn't refusing to help her, but I couldn't be her full-time babysitter. She responded by telling me that I never cared about her and always made everything about me. I was taken aback. We've had disagreements before, but this felt different. She kept pushing me, and I finally snapped. I told her that I wasn't going to put my life on hold for her anymore and that she needed to figure out a more sustainable solution for childcare. After our conversation, Kayla didn't reach out for a week, and when she did, she was cold and distant. I feel guilty about how things ended, but at the same time, I'm frustrated. I've been trying to help her as much as I can, but I feel like she's crossing a line and taking advantage of my goodwill. So, AITA for refusing to babysit my niece anymore after my sister went behind my back and changed the plans without asking me. I feel like I'm just setting a boundary, but now I'm wondering if I'm being too harsh or selfish. Hey friends, if you enjoy this content, don't forget to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments. We really want to know what you like and what could be improved. What do you think of the video? Are there any topics you'd like to see in future videos? Your feedback really helps us get better. Thanks for being with us. AITA for not letting my best friend move in with me after she kept canceling plans and ghosting me. I, 26F, have a best friend, Sarah, 27F, who I've known since high school. We've always been incredibly close, shared everything, confided in each other, and made plans together for literally everything. Sarah has always been there for me when I needed her, and I've done the same for her. For years, I thought we were inseparable. But recently, things started to shift. It wasn't an overnight change, but over the past year or so, I've noticed Sarah pulling away more and more. She started canceling plans last minute, bailing out of activities we had planned months in advance, and just generally being hard to get in touch with. I get that life can get busy, and I've always tried to be understanding, but the frequency of her flaking out started to feel personal. It started off small. She would cancel on plans a day or two before, giving me some vague excuse like, I'm just so tired, I need a night to myself. I didn't think much of it at first. I get that sometimes you need time to recharge. But then it started happening more and more. She would cancel plans an hour before we were supposed to meet up, or sometimes even not respond to my texts at all. I'd ask if everything was okay, and she'd apologize and say she had been busy or overwhelmed, but that was the extent of it. No real explanation, no effort to reschedule or make it up. It really started to bother me after a while, especially when it became clear that she was still going out with other people. She'd post on social media about hanging out with different friends, going to parties, or doing activities we had discussed doing together but had to cancel. It felt like I was the one getting left behind. I tried talking to her about it, but whenever I brought it up, she'd brush it off and say she was just going through a tough time and didn't know how to manage her social life. I gave her space, but honestly, it felt like I was the only one trying to keep the friendship alive. I was always the one reaching out, and it seemed like she couldn't be bothered to keep the connection going. It hurt because I was starting to feel like she wasn't valuing me or our friendship the way I did. About 6 months ago, Sarah came to me with a huge favor. She had just broken up with her long-term boyfriend and was in a really tough spot emotionally. She told me she was struggling to find a new place to live and asked if she could stay with me temporarily. At the time, I was still hopeful that our friendship could get back on track. I understood that breakups were hard, and I wanted to help her through it, so I said yes. I told her it would be fine as long as she respected my space and was mindful of my schedule. I didn't expect her to pay rent since it was only meant to be temporary, but I did ask her to help out with groceries and be considerate about her presence. I've lived alone for a couple of years and value my alone time, so I wanted to make sure we had clear boundaries to avoid tension. She agreed, and we set a move-in date. From the very start, things were off. The first few days were fine, but then the old patterns started repeating. Sarah would be around the apartment, but she'd hardly interact with me. She'd sit in her room all day, or if she did come out, it was only to grab something to eat and retreat back. At first, I chalked it up to her being in a bad mental place due to the breakup, but as the days turned into weeks, I started feeling like I was just a place to crash rather than someone she genuinely wanted to be around. I began to feel increasingly uncomfortable. We weren't having any real conversations, and it seemed like Sarah was still avoiding me. We'd have plans to hang out, but then she'd cancel at the last minute. She'd tell me she was too tired or had other things to do. I didn't want to be that person who keeps nagging, but it hurt. It felt like I was doing all the emotional labor, even though I'd already done so much for her by letting her stay with me. But then came the breaking point. One evening, I had a quiet night planned with a book and a cup of tea, and I was really looking forward to it. Around 7 p.m., Sarah came into the living room and asked if I wanted to hang out. I said I'd love to, but I'd been looking forward to my downtime. I suggested that maybe we could catch up the next day. She got upset and said I was being antisocial and that I was always pushing her away. This really threw me off because I hadn't done anything but suggest another time to hang out. I explained that I just needed some space, but she got frustrated and stormed off into her room. The next day, she barely spoke to me. I tried to reach out, but she ignored me for hours. That night, she came out and said she was going out with some friends, and I was once again left feeling like an afterthought. After this, I started to question if this situation was even healthy for me. I was being constantly ghosted, and it was starting to feel like she was taking advantage of my hospitality. I decided to have an honest conversation with her. I sat down and told her that I had been feeling neglected and disrespected by her actions. I explained that I had let her move in because I cared about her, but her behavior was making it really hard for me to continue being her support system. I told her that I needed her to either be more present and considerate or to find another place to stay. She was incredibly hurt and started crying. She said she was sorry and that she had been struggling with a lot of things but didn't know how to ask for help. She apologized for taking me for granted, but at the same time, she didn't seem willing to change her behavior. The conversation ended with her agreeing to be more considerate, but nothing really changed. A week later, she came to me and said that she had found a new place to live and would be moving out. I was relieved, but also a bit confused. I didn't know whether to feel guilty for asking her to leave or proud of setting boundaries. After she moved out, our communication started to dwindle even further. She barely reached out, and when I tried to check in on her, she either ignored me or gave short responses. Eventually, I stopped trying. Now, several months have passed, and Sarah has reached out a few times to apologize for everything. She says she realizes she was a terrible friend and that she misses me, but I'm conflicted. I'm not sure I want to pick up where we left off. I've been focusing on myself, and it feels like I'm the one who's been doing all the work to keep this friendship alive. I'm not sure if I can go back to the same dynamic, especially after everything that happened. So, AITA for not letting my best friend move in with me after she kept canceling plans and ghosting me. AITA for refusing to let my sister stay with me after she borrowed money and never paid it back. I, 32M, have a younger sister, Lily, 28F, and we've always had a bit of a strained relationship. I'm not saying we've never gotten along, but there's been some tension between us for as long as I can remember. She's always been the type to ask for help when she needs it, but over the years, I've come to realize that she often takes advantage of my generosity. I try to be supportive, but she has a pattern of asking for things, promising to pay me back, and then disappearing when it's time to settle up. I know some families have complicated dynamics, but I'm starting to wonder if I've been too naive in believing that things would change. A couple of years ago, Lily found herself in a tight financial spot. She had been in a serious relationship that ended badly, and she was struggling to pay her bills and rent. She called me and asked if I could lend her some money to get by, assuring me that she would pay me back as soon as she got back on her feet. At that time, I was doing pretty well financially, so I agreed to lend her $2,000. I trusted her when she promised she'd repay me within a few months, especially since we're family. Fast forward a year, and I still haven't seen a cent of that $2,000. Every time I bring it up, she says things like, "I'm almost there," or "I'm waiting for my next paycheck," or "I'll pay you back soon, I promise." I've been patient, even though I've been feeling more and more frustrated. She seemed to be able to afford luxuries like going out with friends and buying new clothes, but when it came to pay me back, I was constantly put on the back burner. At some point, I stopped asking because I was tired of hearing empty promises, but the money was still hanging over me. I'm not exactly rich, so this situation put me in a difficult position. I was starting to feel resentful. I had lent her money when I didn't have to, and now I felt like I was being taken for granted. A few weeks ago, Lily reached out again, this time with an even bigger request. She said she had fallen behind on her rent and was at risk of getting evicted. She asked if she could stay with me for a while until she could get back on her feet. She said she was willing to pay me rent and contribute to groceries while she stayed here, but she needed a place to crash immediately because she couldn't afford to keep living in her apartment. She apologized for not paying me back the previous loan and promised she would start paying me back once she was settled. I told her I didn't feel comfortable lending her more money, especially after what had happened the first time. I said I couldn't afford to give her another loan or let her stay with me. I explained that the previous situation had left me feeling like I was being taken advantage of, and I didn't want to put myself in a position where I would be enabling that behavior again. She got really upset, accusing me of being selfish and not caring about family. She said she was in a crisis and that she had nowhere else to go. She claimed that I was holding a grudge over something that had happened over a year ago and that she was doing her best to get her life together. She told me I was being cold-hearted and that if I truly cared about her, I'd help her out during this tough time. I tried to explain that I wasn't trying to be cold-hearted, but that I had boundaries. I told her that it wasn't just about the money. It was about the way she had repeatedly asked for help without following through on her promises. I also reminded her that I wasn't financially well off enough to take on the burden of supporting her again. She didn't take this well, and she accused me of being judgmental and not understanding what she was going through. She ended up telling our parents about the situation, and now they're upset with me. They've been calling me, telling me that I should help Lily, that she's family, and that I should be more understanding of her situation. They said I should let her stay with me for a while so she can get back on her feet. They even suggested that I could give her more time to pay me back later. I told them that I didn't think it was a good idea and that I had to prioritize my own well-being. They called me selfish and said I was making too big a deal out of a small family issue. My parents have been very supportive of Lily in the past and have helped her out financially when she's needed it, which has only made me feel more like the bad guy in this situation. I've always been the one who tries to be responsible with money, and I've worked hard to be in a stable place. But now I feel like I'm being painted as the villain for not doing what they think is the right thing by letting Lily stay with me. Lily has now stopped speaking to me, and my parents have been giving me the silent treatment too. I've been told that I'm being petty and that I'm ruining family relationships over money. But honestly, I don't know what more I can do. I've been generous in the past, but at some point, it feels like I'm just enabling bad behavior. So now, I'm left wondering if I made a mistake by refusing to let her stay with me. Maybe I should have just sucked it up and done it for the sake of family, even though I feel like I'm being taken advantage of. On the other hand, I don't think I'm being unreasonable by setting boundaries after all that's happened. AITA for refusing to let my sister stay with me after she borrowed money and never paid it back. AITA for refusing to help my brother financially after he spent all his savings on a vacation. I, 32F, come from a fairly tight-knit family, and growing up, my parents taught my siblings and I the importance of budgeting, saving, and planning for the future. My brother, Chris, 30M, and I have always had a good relationship, but recently, things have been getting a bit strained, and I'm not sure if I'm in the wrong here. A little background. I'm the oldest of 3 siblings, and I've always taken my role as the responsible one seriously. I'm financially stable, have a good job, and have been able to build up some savings. I don't have children yet, but I'm planning for the future, and I've always lived by the idea that my financial security is a result of good planning and living within my means. Chris, on the other hand, has always been more of a free spirit. He's never been great at budgeting or saving, but he always seems to get by, often relying on others to bail him out when things get tough. He's a great guy, and I love him, but his attitude toward money has always caused some tension between us. A few months ago, Chris came to me with some big news. He had saved up enough money for a vacation to Europe. It was his dream trip that he had been talking about for years, and he was so excited. However, as we were talking about it, I learned that he had spent almost all of his savings on this trip, money he had set aside for emergencies, bills, and future plans. He hadn't budgeted properly for the trip, and in fact, he had maxed out his credit cards to cover some of the costs. I was immediately concerned. I've always been a big believer in having an emergency fund and living within your means, and I expressed my concerns to Chris. I told him that I understood how much he wanted to go on this trip, but I felt it was irresponsible for him to spend all his savings on something that wasn't essential. I also reminded him that if something unexpected came up, like an emergency or a major life change, he'd be left in a very vulnerable position financially. Chris brushed off my concerns and assured me that everything would be fine. He told me he had planned the trip for a long time, and it was something he really needed to do for himself. I tried to support him, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was making a huge mistake. Fast forward to a few weeks ago, and Chris came to me again, this time asking for financial help. He had returned from his trip, but it hadn't gone as smoothly as he had hoped. He'd had a great time, but he had also run into unexpected expenses, like medical bills from an injury he sustained while hiking and a flight change fee that was more expensive than he anticipated. To make matters worse, he had been unable to find a stable job for a few months before the trip, and he wasn't sure how he was going to cover his rent for the next month. I was taken aback when he asked me for help. He admitted that he had no savings left, and while he was looking for a job, he was in a tough spot. He told me that he needed $2,000 to cover his rent and other bills. He assured me that he'd pay me back as soon as he could, but the truth was I wasn't confident that he would. In the past, he had asked for small loans here and there, but they were always temporary fixes, and he never seemed to get his finances under control. I didn't want to leave him high and dry, but I also knew that helping him would only be a temporary solution. I asked him how he had managed his finances during the time leading up to his trip, and he admitted that he had ignored my advice and spent his money without thinking of the consequences. He told me that he didn't regret going on the trip, but now he was in a tough situation because he didn't have the savings or emergency fund to fall back on. I thought long and hard about it, and ultimately, I decided that I couldn't give him the money. I explained to Chris that I loved him and wanted to help, but I couldn't keep bailing him out of situations that he had created by not being responsible with his money. I told him that I didn't want to enable his behavior and that I wanted him to learn how to manage his finances better so that he wouldn't find himself in this situation again. I also told him that it wasn't just about the money. It was about learning the importance of budgeting and saving, which he clearly hadn't done. Chris was really hurt by my decision. He accused me of being unsupportive and said that I was treating him like a failure. He told me that he understood my perspective, but felt that I was being too harsh. He said that I had plenty of money, so why couldn't I just help him out when he needed it? He also pointed out that I was in a better financial position than he was, and that I was being selfish by not offering assistance. I tried to explain that this wasn't about me being selfish, but rather about setting healthy boundaries. I told him that I didn't want to become his personal bank, and that I couldn't keep enabling his poor financial decisions. I also reminded him that I had tried to offer advice before, and he had ignored it, so I felt that this was a consequence of his actions. Since then, things have been a little awkward between us. Chris has barely spoken to me, and when we do talk, it's often tense. I've had some family members weigh in, and while they understand my reasoning, they've also pointed out that Chris is struggling and that I could have helped him out this one time. Some of them think that I should have offered him the money as a family favor, but I'm still standing by my decision. Now I'm wondering if I was too harsh. I get that Chris is struggling, but I also feel that he needs to face the consequences of his actions and learn how to be more responsible with his money. I love him, but I don't want to enable his financial irresponsibility. So, AITA for refusing to help my brother financially after he spent all his savings on vacation? Let me know what you think. AITA for not giving my sister a key to my house after she asked me to? I, 29F, have always had a pretty close relationship with my family, especially with my younger sister, Jess, 26F. We grew up in a very tight-knit household, and for most of our adult lives, we've stayed relatively close. I live in a nice apartment in the city, which I worked really hard to afford, and I'm generally proud of how I've set things up for myself. I don't have a lot of roommates or anyone living with me, so it's my space, my rules. I value my privacy, and while I do have close friends and family over from time to time, I like knowing that my home is my own sanctuary where I can truly relax and be myself. Recently, my sister Jess has been asking me for a key to my apartment. She lives about an hour away from me, in a place that's honestly not the best, and she's expressed that she'd like to have a key so that she can stop by whenever she needs something or wants to hang out without giving me too much notice. At first, I thought it was a bit odd, but I figured I'd hear her out and see what she was really asking for. I know she doesn't have the best living situation, and we've talked a few times about her wanting to move closer to me for convenience, but she's always been hesitant to make the leap. At first, she just mentioned it casually like, "Oh, wouldn't it be great if I had a key to your place? I could just drop by any time, and you wouldn't have to worry about me showing up unannounced." I kind of laughed it off and told her I wasn't sure about giving a key to anyone, even family. I told her that I just like having some boundaries with my personal space. She seemed to understand, and there wasn't any further mention of it for a few weeks. But then, it started getting more serious. Jess began making it a point to ask whenever we talked. One day, she texted me, saying, "Hey, can I get a copy of your key to your place? I really think it would be so much easier for me to just have one. I don't want to always have to bother you about whether or not I can visit." I didn't know how to respond, so I took a day or two to think it over. I was definitely leaning towards saying no, but I didn't want to seem like a jerk. So I called her and told her that I wasn't comfortable with her having a key. I explained that I loved her and would always be there for her, but that my home was my personal space and that I needed some boundaries. I also told her that she was more than welcome to visit whenever she wanted, but that it would have to be planned in advance, and I would prefer if she didn't just drop by without notice. She was pretty upset at first, but I thought that would be the end of it. I didn't expect her to understand completely, but I thought she'd respect my decision. Unfortunately, it didn't go that way. Over the next few weeks, Jess began bringing it up every time we spoke. She would say things like, "I just don't get why you don't want me to have a key. I'm your sister. We're family, and I'd never take advantage of it." The more she brought it up, the more I started feeling uncomfortable. I started feeling like she was guilt-tripping me into agreeing to something I wasn't okay with. But I stood firm and told her that my boundaries were important, and this wasn't something I was willing to budge on. One day, things escalated. Jess came to visit me, and while we were hanging out, she casually mentioned that she had gone ahead and asked a locksmith to make a copy of my key. She said, "I just think it would be easier for both of us if I could come over without asking all the time. I promise I'll be respectful and won't just show up without notice." I was shocked. She had gone behind my back and made a copy of my key without my permission. I was furious and hurt, feeling like she completely disregarded my boundaries. I told her I couldn't believe she'd done that, and that she had completely crossed a line. She got defensive and said, "You're overreacting. It's just a key. I just want to feel close to you, and I thought you'd understand that." I told her that she didn't understand how important it was for me to maintain control over my own space, and that it wasn't just about the key. It was about respect. After that, I asked her to leave, and I took back the spare key she had made. She was really upset and said, "You're acting like I'm some stranger. You're just being selfish, and it's sad you don't trust me enough to let me have access to your place." Since then, things have been tense between us. I haven't been able to shake the feeling that she's now holding a grudge against me for not giving her what she wanted. She hasn't really reached out much, and when she does, it's always awkward. I feel bad that things have gotten so strained, but at the same time, I don't think I should have to give up my boundaries for the sake of her comfort. I've tried explaining to her that my decision isn't personal and that I love her, but it's important for me to have some autonomy over my life and my space. She just keeps insisting that it's not a big deal, that I'm making a mountain out of a molehill. She's even tried to guilt-trip me by saying that real family doesn't put up walls between each other and that I'm being distant for not allowing her into my space. So, AITA for refusing to give my sister a key to my house after she asked me to? I feel like I'm just asking for a little respect, but now I'm wondering if I'm being too rigid or if I should have just given in to keep the peace. AITA for refusing to help my brother pay for his girlfriend's expensive birthday gift? I, 27F, have an older brother, Chris, 30M, who has always been the type to jump headfirst into relationships. He tends to get really involved really quickly, and while I've never been one to judge who he dates, I've always been a little cautious when it comes to how fast things move. Recently, he's been dating someone, Megan, 28F, who I've only met a couple of times. From the start, Megan has been really sweet, and I can tell that Chris really cares about her, but I've had some concerns about their relationship, mostly because Chris tends to lose his sense of self when he's in a relationship, and Megan seems to be someone who has a lot of high expectations. The issue came up when Chris asked me for help with buying Megan a birthday gift. He had been talking about how he wanted to get her something really special this year because she had been so amazing to him, and I understand wanting to do something nice for someone you care about. However, as he started describing the gift, I started to get uneasy. He told me he wanted to buy Megan an expensive designer purse that was over $1,200. At first, I thought he was joking, but he assured me he was serious. Chris has always been a bit financially irresponsible. He tends to live paycheck to paycheck, buying things he can't afford and then struggling later. He's had some issues with managing his money, and it's always been a source of tension between us. We've talked about it before, and I've tried to give him advice, but he never listens. He insists that he's fine, but it's clear he's not. So when he asked me to help him out with the money for the purse, I knew it wasn't a good idea. I told him I couldn't justify spending that kind of money on a gift for someone I don't know very well. I also pointed out that if he couldn't afford the purse on his own, maybe he should reconsider buying it. I mentioned that it wasn't about not wanting to do something nice for Megan. It was about his financial situation and his tendency to overspend on things that he later regrets. I also told him that I didn't feel comfortable contributing to such an expensive gift when I knew he had been struggling with money in the past. Chris was disappointed, but didn't take it too harshly at first. He tried to convince me that he could pay me back in a few months, but I told him I didn't want to put myself in the position of lending him money again. The last time I did that, it took him over 6 months to pay me back, and even then, it was in installments that were more of a token than an actual repayment. I made it clear that I wasn't willing to get involved in this situation. The problem came when Chris kept pushing. He started calling me and texting me every couple of days asking if I had changed my mind. At first, I tried to be polite and firm, telling him that my decision was final. But then, he started getting more desperate. He even mentioned that Megan had really been hinting about wanting the purse for her birthday, and that he'd feel really bad if he couldn't get it for her. I got the sense that he was trying to guilt-trip me into helping him, and I started feeling really uncomfortable. One day, after a week of constant pressure, Chris came over to my apartment and tried again. He brought up how much Megan meant to him and how important it was for him to show her that he cared. I told him I understood, but I reminded him that love isn't about buying expensive gifts. I told him that he didn't need to go into debt to prove his feelings. I also pointed out that Megan's expectations seemed really high, and I didn't think it was healthy for him to be so focused on buying her something so extravagant, especially when he couldn't afford it. That's when Chris got really upset. He raised his voice and said that I was being unsupportive and didn't understand how important this was to him. He told me that Megan was the one and that I should just trust his judgment. He said that I was acting like I didn't care about his happiness and that if I truly cared, I would help him make this happen. He even brought up past instances where I had asked for help and he had been there for me, implying that I owed him. I tried to stay calm and explain that I wasn't saying I didn't care about him, but that helping him buy an expensive gift for Megan wasn't something I could do. I told him that I wanted him to be happy, but I didn't think this was the right way to go about it. I also reminded him that he had a history of financial problems and that I didn't want to contribute to him making another poor decision. I suggested that he think about a more practical gift for Megan, something that showed he cared without breaking the bank. Chris stormed out of my apartment, and I haven't heard from him since. It's been about a week, and we've barely spoken. I've tried texting him a couple of times to check in, but he hasn't responded. I'm starting to feel guilty, but at the same time, I'm also frustrated. I know that I was just trying to look out for him, but I can't shake the feeling that he's really hurt by my refusal to help him. So, AITA for refusing to help my brother pay for his girlfriend's expensive birthday gift? I feel like I was just being realistic, but I also don't want to lose my relationship with him over something like this. AITA for refusing to help my brother financially after he spent all his savings on a vacation? I, 32F, come from a fairly tight-knit family, and growing up, my parents taught my siblings and I the importance of budgeting, saving, and planning for the future. My brother, Chris, 30M, and I have always had a good relationship, but recently, things have been getting a bit strained, and I'm not sure if I'm in the wrong here. A little background. I'm the oldest of 3 siblings, and I've always taken my role as the responsible one seriously. I'm financially stable, have a good job, and have been able to build up some savings. I don't have children yet, but I'm planning for the future, and I've always lived by the idea that my financial security is a result of good planning and living within my means. Chris, on the other hand, has always been more of a free spirit. He's never been great at budgeting or saving, but he always seems to get by, often relying on others to bail him out when things get tough. He's a great guy, and I love him, but his attitude toward money has always caused some tension between us. A few months ago, Chris came to me with some big news. He had saved up enough money for a vacation to Europe. It was his dream trip that he had been talking about for years, and he was so excited. However, as we were talking about it, I learned that he had spent almost all of his savings on this trip, money he had set aside for emergencies, bills, and future plans. He hadn't budgeted properly for the trip, and in fact, he had maxed out his credit cards to cover some of the costs. I was immediately concerned. I've always been a big believer in having an emergency fund and living within your means, and I expressed my concerns to Chris. I told him that I understood how much he wanted to go on this trip, but I felt it was irresponsible for him to spend all his savings on something that wasn't essential. I also reminded him that if something unexpected came up, like an emergency or a major life change, he'd be left in a very vulnerable position financially. Chris brushed off my concerns and assured me that everything would be fine. He told me he had planned the trip for a long time, and it was something he really needed to do for himself. I tried to support him, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was making a huge mistake. Fast forward to a few weeks ago, and Chris came to me again, this time asking for financial help. He had returned from his trip, but it hadn't gone as smoothly as he had hoped. He'd had a great time, but he had also run into unexpected expenses, like medical bills from an injury he sustained while hiking and a flight change fee that was more expensive than he anticipated. To make matters worse, he had been unable to find a stable job for a few months before the trip, and he wasn't sure how he was going to cover his rent for the next month. I was taken aback when he asked me for help. He admitted that he had no savings left, and while he was looking for a job, he was in a tough spot. He told me that he needed $2,000 to cover his rent and other bills. He assured me that he'd pay me back as soon as he could, but the truth was I wasn't confident that he would. In the past, he had asked for small loans here and there, but they were always temporary fixes, and he never seemed to get his finances under control. I didn't want to leave him high and dry, but I also knew that helping him would only be a temporary solution. I asked him how he had managed his finances during the time leading up to his trip, and he admitted that he had ignored my advice and spent his money without thinking of the consequences. He told me that he didn't regret going on the trip, but now he was in a tough situation because he didn't have the savings or emergency fund to fall back on. I thought long and hard about it, and ultimately, I decided that I couldn't give him the money. I explained to Chris that I loved him and wanted to help, but I couldn't keep bailing him out of situations that he had created by not being responsible with his money. I told him that I didn't want to enable his behavior and that I wanted him to learn how to manage his finances better so that he wouldn't find himself in this situation again. I also told him that it wasn't just about the money. It was about learning the importance of budgeting and saving, which he clearly hadn't done. Chris was really hurt by my decision. He accused me of being unsupportive and said that I was treating him like a failure. He told me that he understood my perspective, but felt that I was being too harsh. He said that I had plenty of money, so why couldn't I just help him out when he needed it? He also pointed out that I was in a better financial position than he was, and that I was being selfish by not offering assistance. I tried to explain that this wasn't about me being selfish, but rather about setting healthy boundaries. I told him that I didn't want to become his personal bank, and that I couldn't keep enabling his poor financial decisions. I also reminded him that I had tried to offer advice before, and he had ignored it, so I felt that this was a consequence of his actions. Since then, things have been a little awkward between us. Chris has barely spoken to me, and when we do talk, it's often tense. I've had some family members weigh in, and while they understand my reasoning, they've also pointed out that Chris is struggling and that I could have helped him out this one time. Some of them think that I should have offered him the money as a family favor, but I'm still standing by my decision. Now I'm wondering if I was too harsh. I get that Chris is struggling, but I also feel that he needs to face the consequences of his actions and learn how to be more responsible with his money. I love him, but I don't want to enable his financial irresponsibility. So, AITA for refusing to help my brother financially after he spent all his savings on vacation? Let me know what you think. AITA for refusing to let my sister stay with me after she borrowed money and never paid it back? I, 32M, have a younger sister, Lily, 28F, and we've always had a bit of a strained relationship. I'm not saying we've never gotten along, but there's been some tension between us for as long as I can remember. She's always been the type to ask for help when she needs it, but over the years, I've come to realize that she often takes advantage of my generosity. I try to be supportive, but she has a pattern of asking for things, promising to pay me back, and then disappearing when it's time to settle up. I know some families have complicated dynamics, but I'm starting to wonder if I've been too naive in believing that things would change. A couple of years ago, Lily found herself in a tight financial spot. She had been in a serious relationship that ended badly, and she was struggling to pay her bills and rent. She called me and asked if I could lend her some money to get by, assuring me that she would pay me back as soon as she got back on her feet. At that time, I was doing pretty well financially, so I agreed to lend her $2,000. I trusted her when she promised she'd repay me within a few months, especially since we're family. Fast forward a year, and I still haven't seen a cent of that $2,000. Every time I bring it up, she says things like, "I'm almost there," or "I'm waiting for my next paycheck," or "I'll pay you back soon, I promise." I've been patient, even though I've been feeling more and more frustrated. She seemed to be able to afford luxuries like going out with friends and buying new clothes, but when it came to pay me back, I was constantly put on the back burner. At some point, I stopped asking because I was tired of hearing empty promises, but the money was still hanging over me. I'm not exactly rich, so this situation put me in a difficult position. I was starting to feel resentful. I had lent her money when I didn't have to, and now I felt like I was being taken for granted. A few weeks ago, Lily reached out again, this time with an even bigger request. She said she had fallen behind on her rent and was at risk of getting evicted. She asked if she could stay with me for a while until she could get back on her feet. She said she was willing to pay me rent and contribute to groceries while she stayed here, but she needed a place to crash immediately because she couldn't afford to keep living in her apartment. She apologized for not paying me back the previous loan and promised she would start paying me back once she was settled. I told her I didn't feel comfortable lending her more money, especially after what had happened the first time. I said I couldn't afford to give her another loan or let her stay with me. I explained that the previous situation had left me feeling like I was being taken advantage of, and I didn't want to put myself in a position where I would be enabling that behavior again. She got really upset, accusing me of being selfish and not caring about family. She said she was in a crisis and that she had nowhere else to go. She claimed that I was holding a grudge over something that had happened over a year ago and that she was doing her best to get her life together. She told me I was being cold-hearted and that if I truly cared about her, I'd help her out during this tough time. I tried to explain that I wasn't trying to be cold-hearted, but that I had boundaries. I told her that it wasn't just about the money. It was about the way she had repeatedly asked for help without following through on her promises. I also reminded her that I wasn't financially well off enough to take on the burden of supporting her again. She didn't take this well, and she accused me of being judgmental and not understanding what she was going through. She ended up telling our parents about the situation, and now they're upset with me. They've been calling me, telling me that I should help Lily, that she's family, and that I should be more understanding of her situation. They said I should let her stay with me for a while so she can get back on her feet. They even suggested that I could give her more time to pay me back later. I told them that I didn't think it was a good idea and that I had to prioritize my own well-being. They called me selfish and said I was making too big a deal out of a small family issue. My parents have been very supportive of Lily in the past and have helped her out financially when she's needed it, which has only made me feel more like the bad guy in this situation. I've always been the one who tries to be responsible with money, and I've worked hard to be in a stable place. But now I feel like I'm being painted as the villain for not doing what they think is the right thing by letting Lily stay with me. Lily has now stopped speaking to me, and my parents have been giving me the silent treatment too. I've been told that I'm being petty and that I'm ruining family relationships over money. But honestly, I don't know what more I can do. I've been generous in the past, but at some point, it feels like I'm just enabling bad behavior. So now, I'm left wondering if I made a mistake by refusing to let her stay with me. Maybe I should have just sucked it up and done it for the sake of family, even though I feel like I'm being taken advantage of. On the other hand, I don't think I'm being unreasonable by setting boundaries after all that's happened. AITA for refusing to let my sister stay with me after she borrowed money and never paid it back. AITA for confronting my cousin about her toxic relationship and telling her she needs to end it. I, 28M, have a cousin, Kara, 26F, who's been in a relationship with her boyfriend, Greg, 29M, for about 2 years. Kara and I grew up together, and we've always been pretty close. Our families have always been tight-knit, and we've shared a lot of milestones, struggles, and happy moments together. So when Kara started dating Greg, I was excited for her because she seemed happy and they appeared to have a great connection. However, over time, I began noticing that something wasn't right. Greg would often make passive-aggressive comments to Kara, and at first, I thought it was just playful teasing. But the more I observed their interactions, the more I realized that his behavior wasn't as innocent as it seemed. He would often belittle her opinions in front of family and friends, make sarcastic remarks about her career ambitions, and undermine her when she was excited about something. Kara would laugh it off, but I could tell it hurt her. At first, I didn't want to get involved because it wasn't my place and I didn't want to cause drama. But as time went on, I started to notice more and more red flags. The situation escalated one evening at a family gathering. We were all in my parents' house for a barbecue, and the group was playing a game of charades. Greg was getting visibly frustrated with Kara when she didn't guess one of his clues correctly. He started making snide remarks about how she was so stupid and couldn't even play a simple game. Kara was clearly embarrassed, and I saw her trying to laugh it off, but it was obvious to everyone that it hurt her. The whole room fell silent for a moment. Afterward, Kara apologized to everyone, but Greg didn't seem to think he'd done anything wrong. That's when I decided to pull Kara aside and ask if she was okay. She told me she was fine and that Greg was just stressed out. I tried to give her the benefit of the doubt, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized I couldn't ignore it anymore. This wasn't just a couple of isolated incidents. It was a pattern, and it was affecting Kara's self-esteem. Fast forward a few months, and things had only gotten worse. At another family event, Greg started making comments about Kara's weight and appearance. He said something like, "You've gained a little weight, huh? Maybe you should lay off the carbs. You're starting to look like your mom, and we both know how much of a pain she is." Kara visibly cringed but didn't say anything back. The whole table was silent, and I could tell people were uncomfortable, but no one said anything. At this point, I couldn't hold my tongue anymore. I waited until later that evening when Greg and Kara were alone in a room, and I went to Kara privately. I told her I was concerned about her relationship with Greg. I told her that I'd noticed how he treated her, that it seemed like he didn't respect her. I told her that I cared about her, and that I wanted her to know she deserved better. Kara got defensive right away. She told me that Greg had been going through a lot lately, and I didn't understand the full picture. She said that he loved her, and that he just had a rough way of showing it. I tried to explain that love shouldn't feel like constant criticism, and that it wasn't normal for someone to make hurtful remarks like that all the time. She shut me down, saying I didn't know what it was like to be in a relationship, and that I was just meddling in her life. I apologized if I had overstepped, but I made it clear that I wasn't trying to be controlling. I just didn't want to see her continue to be treated poorly. I told her that if Greg really cared about her, he would respect her and support her, not put her down. But she told me that I wasn't her therapist and that I needed to stay out of her personal life. The next few weeks were awkward. Kara avoided me at family events, and I tried to respect her space, but I couldn't stop worrying about her. I saw her less and less, and when we did talk, it was only on the surface level. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't want to push her further away. Then, about a month ago, Kara called me in the middle of the night, crying. She told me she was in the middle of a huge fight with Greg. Apparently, he had told her that she would never amount to anything in her career, that she was lucky to have him because no one else would put up with her. Kara was devastated, and I could hear the pain in her voice. She admitted to me that she had been feeling miserable in the relationship for a while, but was afraid of losing him. I didn't say, "I told you so," but I did gently remind her of everything I'd said to her before. I told her that she didn't deserve to be with someone who made her feel worthless, and that she needed to think about whether this relationship was really healthy for her. She agreed to take some time to think about it, and I offered her a place to stay if she needed to get away from Greg for a while. The next few days were tense, but eventually, Kara told me she had broken up with Greg. She said she realized that I was right, and that she needed to focus on herself for once. I was relieved for her, but also worried that she might go back to him. A week later, she texted me, saying she was considering giving Greg another chance. She said he had apologized and promised to change, but she wasn't sure what to do. I told her that I understood that it was a difficult decision, but I made it clear that if she went back to him, I wouldn't be able to support her in the same way. I told her I wasn't going to watch her go through this cycle of hurt and disappointment. I didn't want to see her lose herself in a toxic relationship, and I knew that if she went back to Greg, she would just end up in the same situation. She hasn't responded to me in a few days, and I'm feeling conflicted. I understand that it's ultimately her choice, but I'm struggling with whether or not I was too harsh. I feel like I had to say something because I care about her and want what's best for her, but I'm afraid I pushed her too far away. So, AITA for confronting my cousin about her toxic relationship and telling her she needs to end it. AITA for kicking out my roommate after she kept stealing from me, even though we've been friends for years. I, 25F, have a roommate, Emily, 26F, who I've been friends with since college. We both went to the same university, and after graduating, we decided to move in together to split rent and give ourselves some stability in the city. We've been living together for almost 2 years now, and for the most part, we've had a pretty smooth arrangement. We've always been able to talk things out and have had a great time together. However, over the past few months, things started to change, and I'm honestly at my breaking point. It all started small, but now it's become a serious issue. It began with little things. I noticed that some of my food would go missing from the fridge or my pantry. I thought maybe I was just misremembering or eating it without realizing. But then it started happening more regularly. I'd buy a pack of snacks or some ingredients for a recipe, and a few days later, they'd be gone. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, so I asked Emily if she'd been eating my stuff. She apologized and said she hadn't realized she was taking it, and that she would be more careful from now on. I accepted her apology, thinking it was just a mistake. But then, the pattern continued. I'd buy something expensive, like a bottle of wine or a specialty item, and it would disappear. I got more frustrated, but I didn't want to seem petty, so I tried to let it go. The last straw came about a month ago when I bought a new expensive face cream that I've been saving up for. I specifically put it in my room on my dresser because I knew it was something I didn't want to share. A few days later, it was gone. At that point, I had had enough. I was getting sick of the constant thefts, and I needed to confront her. I decided to sit Emily down and have a serious conversation. I told her I was really frustrated about my things disappearing, and I asked her point blank if she had been taking my stuff. She got really defensive, saying that she hadn't taken anything and that I was being paranoid. I didn't buy it, and I told her that it wasn't just one or two items. It was a recurring issue that I couldn't ignore anymore. She still denied it, but I didn't let up. I told her that I knew she had been taking my things, and if it kept happening, we would have to seriously reevaluate our living situation. Emily started crying and said she was going through a tough time emotionally, that she had been stressed at work, and that she didn't mean to take my things. She promised to be more careful and that it wouldn't happen again. I gave her the benefit of the doubt, but within days, things started disappearing again. I'd find an item I'd bought for myself, whether it was something small like a snack or something more expensive like a bottle of skincare products, missing. I started to feel like I was being taken advantage of, and the situation was starting to make me feel uncomfortable in my own home. I was paying rent for this space, and yet I didn't feel like I could trust my roommate not to take my personal things. I started keeping my things locked away in my room, but even that didn't seem to stop the problem. I would come home from work to find things moved around in my personal space. It felt like she was testing the boundaries, and it was clear to me that she was not respecting me or my property. The final straw came when I found my expensive headphones missing. I had a nice pair of noise-canceling headphones that I used every day to listen to music and podcasts. I had left them in my room on the desk, and when I went to grab them a few days ago, they were gone. I was absolutely furious at that point. I had enough of this and decided to take action. I confronted Emily again. This time I was firm. I told her I knew she had been taking my things and that I could no longer live with her under these circumstances. I told her I was giving her 2 weeks to find somewhere else to live because I couldn't continue living with someone who couldn't respect my personal belongings. She was taken aback and immediately started apologizing, saying she didn't know how to control herself and that she'd been dealing with emotional issues. She promised that she would stop taking my things and begged me not to kick her out. But at this point, I was done. I told her that I needed someone I could trust, and she had already broken that trust too many times. I couldn't keep living in this environment. She was upset and hurt, but I stuck to my decision. Emily tried to get in touch with me over the next few days, apologizing multiple times and asking if we could try to work things out. She claimed that she would seek therapy to address her emotional struggles and that she was just going through a rough time. She promised to be better if I let her stay, but I still wasn't convinced. I had given her more than enough chances, and each time, it only got worse. I felt like she was using her emotional struggles as an excuse for stealing from me, and I didn't want to enable that behavior anymore. Eventually, Emily found a new place to live, and we parted ways. She's still trying to reach out to me, but I'm honestly unsure how to feel about the situation. We were good friends for a long time, and I feel bad that it ended this way. But at the same time, I don't feel like I was in the wrong for kicking her out. I feel like I gave her more than enough chances to make things right. And in the end, her behavior was just too much for me to tolerate. Now, I've been getting messages from some of our mutual friends who are telling me that I overreacted and that I should have been more understanding of her struggles. They say that I should have given her another chance to prove herself and that I should have just had a more open conversation instead of kicking her out. Some of them say that I could have found another way to work things out without resorting to eviction. I get that people are trying to defend her, but at the same time, I don't think I was wrong in setting a boundary. I value my personal space, and the way she was treating me by constantly taking my things was making me feel disrespected in my own home. So, AITA for kicking out my roommate after she kept stealing from me, even though we've been friends for years. Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss new videos. Also, leave a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Your support and engagement mean a lot to me. See you in the next video.